The night my son called me a worthless old mechanic, I was standing in the driveway of the house I'd lived in for 40 years, holding a duffel bag I hadn't unpacked since our honeymoon. He said it flat, like he was reading off a weather report. Certain. Done with it. I'm Foster Sanchez, 69. For 41 years, I ran a boat repair shop on the working side of a Maine harbor town, one of those places where the paint peels faster than anybody bothers fixing it. And the smell of diesel and varnish gets so far into your hands, it never really comes back out. I shut the shop down 3 years ago when my knees quit agreeing with concrete floors. My wife, Lucinda, kept the books for 38 of those years. She died 6 weeks back. Heart, the doctor said, though I've had my own private suspicion some part of her heart had been tired a lot longer than any of us wanted to admit. Earlier that same day, at the reception after the funeral, I'd stood by the folding table in the church basement, holding a paper cup of coffee I never drank, watching people I'd known 30 years shake Nash's hand like he was already the man of the house. Somebody's aunt patted my arm and told me Lucinda looked so peaceful, and I nodded and said, "Thank you the way you do," on autopilot, while across the room Nash was already talking numbers with our accountant in a corner, quiet and quick, like there wasn't a casket still cooling in the ground 4 hours away. I didn't think much of it at the time. Grief makes you generous with explanations for other people's behavior. I told myself he was handling things the way he handles everything. Get ahead of the paperwork so the feelings don't catch up to you. I didn't know yet how wrong that Red was. The night of her funeral, I was still in my good shoes, standing in our kitchen, and my son Nash told me I needed to be out of the house by morning. "It's not your house anymore, Dad." He didn't even look up from his phone. "Will's clear. Mom's estate goes to me. You get the workshop property." That's it. I laughed. One short breath of a laugh. Because for a second I figured this was grief talking, the kind of thing people say and take back an hour later with a cup of coffee and an apology. Lucinda used to do that after a rough day. Snap at me. Then come find me 20 minutes later with 2 mugs and a look that said sorry without spending the word. Nash didn't come find me with any coffee. "The workshop," I said. "Nash, that place has been closed 3 years. There's nothing in there but dust and old tools. Then I guess that's what you get." He looked at me then, and something in his face didn't match the boy I remembered. The one who used to sit on an overturned bucket in my shop for hours, watching me sand a hull, never once bored. "You had 40 years, Dad. What are you going to do with a real inheritance anyway? Buy a fishing boat and pretend you're still 40? I didn't have an answer for that. Something in my throat closed around it. "You're a worthless old mechanic living off a pension," he said, quieter, which somehow landed worse than if he'd shouted it. Mom knew that. Probably why she set it up this way. Wanted me to handle things properly. On the counter behind him sat Lucinda's reading glasses, folded on top of the newspaper, the way she always left them. Except somebody had already moved them 2 inches to the left, straightened them, like the counter needed to look presentable for people who hadn't earned the right to touch it yet. A small thing. Shouldn't have hurt the way it did. I grabbed my bag. I'd packed it 3 days before, after the hospital, some part of me already knowing I might need to leave in a hurry, and walked out into a driveway lit orange by the porch bulb. Lucinda always complained was too dim to be worth the electricity. Nash didn't follow me out. I heard the deadbolt turn before I even got the car door open. The workshop sits 4 miles out past the marina, at the end of a gravel road that floods every spring, whether anybody wants it to or not. I hadn't set foot in there in over a year. The padlock had rusted stiff, and I had to work the key back and forth with fingers gone numb until my knuckles ached before it finally gave. The door groaned open on a smell I could have picked out blind. Sawdust, old varnish, the particular staleness of a room shut up too long. My flashlight caught cobwebs strung between the rafters, a workbench buried under drop cloths, shapes I still knew by feel more than by sight. There was a folding cot in the back office, the one Lucinda used to keep made up for nights. I worked too late to drive home. I set it up in the dark, lay down still in my funeral suit, and stared at a ceiling I couldn't see. I want to tell you I felt angry. Mostly I just felt lost. I caught myself at one point, reaching for the phone to call Lucinda and tell her about it. I actually had my thumb halfway to her name in the contacts before it hit me all over again that there was nobody on the other end of that line anymore. That's the kind of thing grief does. It doesn't ask permission. In 42 years, she never once said a hard word about the shop, about my hands, about what kind of man spends his whole life sanding hulls instead of chasing something bigger. If anything, she used to tell the ladies at church she'd married the most patient man in the county. And patience, she said, was worth more than money on most days that mattered. So why leave me nothing but this? I told myself it was some kind of mistake. Grief makes people sloppy with paperwork. Lawyers rush things through. I told myself Nash was in shock too, that the cruelty was just shock wearing my son's face and that in a week he'd call and things would go back to something like normal. That lasted 4 days. On the second day, I drove past the old house. Habit, I guess, more than any real reason, and there was a dumpster sitting in the driveway. Nash stood beside it in a jacket too clean for real work, pointing 2 men toward the garage. My tools. My father's tools, actually, the ones I'd inherited and never used much because mine were better, but kept anyway on account of his initials burned into the handles. Old Mr. Perkins from 2 doors down was out trimming his hedge, and he'd stopped with the shears half-raised, watching the whole thing with the kind of careful, sideways attention people give a car accident they don't want to be seen, staring at. He caught my eye for half a second and looked away fast, back to his hedge, like he hadn't seen anything at all. I understood it. Nobody wants to be the one who says something. I pulled over. Got out. Nash. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning out the garage." Said like it should have been obvious. "It's just junk, Dad. Nobody needs any of this." "That was your grandfather's." He shrugged. Actually shrugged, while one of the men pitched a wooden toolbox into the dumpster hard enough that something inside it cracked. "Take it if you want it." "I don't have room for a museum." I didn't take it. Couldn't tell you exactly why. Something stubborn in me refused to go digging through a dumpster while my own son watched. I got back in the car and drove off before he could see whatever was happening on my face. The next wound came by phone, 2 days later from Mrs. Doyle down the road. "Foster, honey." I ran into Nash at the market. Her voice had that careful gentleness people use when they're not sure how much you already know. He said, "You're staying somewhere, for now, that you'll figure something out." I just wanted to check on you. Figure something out. Like I was a stray he'd mentioned in passing to a neighbor. Nothing more urgent than that. I told her I was fine. Told her I was at the workshop temporarily, which was true enough, and got off the phone before my voice could give away how much that phrase had cost me. That first week, my meals were whatever I could manage on a hot I found in the shop's back cupboard. Canned soup, a couple eggs I'd bought at the gas station, because I hadn't thought to stock a real kitchen, coffee made too strong, because I never could get the ratio right without Lucinda standing over my shoulder, telling me I'd put in too many scoops again. I ate most nights, sitting on an overturned bucket at the workbench, the same one Nash used to sit on as a boy, which was its own particular kind of ache I didn't expect and didn't especially want. The last one, though, that's the one that showed me what all of it had really been about. Nash called on the 5th day. His voice had changed again, gone warm, and a little too businesslike. The kind of warm that makes the hair on your arms stand up before you've even worked out why. "Hey, Dad." I'm going through some of Mom's old files, papers shuffling somewhere behind him. "The workshop property, is that deed just in your name? Or is there anybody else on it? Like a partner, something from back when you ran the place?" I sat on the edge of that cot a long moment, the cold coming up through the concrete and into shoes I hadn't bothered changing since the funeral. "Why's that matter to you, Nash? You said yourself it's worthless." "It's not. I'm just handling the paperwork properly, making sure everything's clean." The businesslike tone slipped, just for a second, and something underneath it came through. Urgency. So it's just you? Nobody else? I don't know, I said, and it was the first honest thing either of us had said on that call. I'd have to look. He mumbled something about a deadline and hung up before I could ask him one single question of my own. I sat there with the phone gone heavy in my hand, feeling something I hadn't let myself feel since the funeral. Not grief, exactly. More like standing on a boat the second the tide shifts. And you understand the ground you'd been counting on was never really ground at all. He hadn't asked if I was sleeping. Hadn't asked if I'd eaten a proper meal in 5 days. He'd called about a deed. I looked around that little office at the boxes Lucinda had stacked along the wall years back, from when she still came by twice a week to keep the books straight. In the corner, under a moving blanket, sat her old wooden tool chest, Sanchez and Piercy Boatworks burned into the lid, the letters faded down to the color of weak tea. Hadn't opened that thing since before she got sick. I don't know why that particular night pulled me over to it instead of any of the others. Maybe it was Nash's voice still ringing in my ears, all business, no sun left in it at all. Maybe I just wanted to touch something that still smelled like her. The hinges groaned when I lifted the lid. Everything sat exactly where she'd left it. Ledgers, rubber-banded receipts, a coffee mug she'd forgotten to bring home years back. Tucked under a folded blue apron, an envelope yellowed at the corners, sealed, my name written across the front in her careful, looping hand, Foster. Not Dad. Not Mr. Sanchez. Just my name, the same way she'd written it on birthday cards for 42 years running. I sat down on that cold floor with the envelope in both hands and, for a good while, didn't open it. Just held it, the kind of holding you do when you're scared of what's inside, and just as scared of never finding out. My hands weren't steady when I finally tore the seal. The paper had gone soft at the folds, handled and refolded enough times before it got put away for good. Foster, if you're reading this, I imagine things have gone the way I was afraid they might. I've watched Nash change these last years and told myself it was just ambition, the kind young men get when they want to prove something. I don't think that's all it is anymore. I think you know it too. Ein. You remember the old partnership with Harlan back when we were trying to keep the shop afloat in '99? Signed those papers at his kitchen table like it was nothing more than a fishing trip. I don't think you ever thought about that land again once the shop slowed down. I did. Kept the copy. It's folded in with this letter. I don't know what happens after I'm gone. I only know you built more into that harbor than anybody's ever given you credit for, and I wasn't about to let it get buried along with the rest of what people think doesn't matter anymore. I love you. Always thought you were worth more than you let yourself believe. Lucinda under the letter, folded into a square gone soft at the edges, was a single sheet with a notary stamp, faded down to a pale purple ghost of itself. I unfolded it slow, careful, the way you'd handle something you were afraid might come apart in your hands. Partnership agreement. Sanchez and Pierce Boatworks. Portland Parcel 114 B. My own signature at the bottom, younger, looser than my hand writes these days, the F still looping the way it used to before the arthritis flattened everything out. Beside it, Harlan Pierce's name. Below both, a date. 25 years ago this past spring. I remembered that kitchen. Harlan's coffee, always too strong. A radio playing something with a fiddle in it. I remembered thinking, at the time, the land wasn't worth much. A stretch of muddy shoreline neither of us could have afforded to build on if we'd tried. We signed it out of habit more than ambition. Two men holding on to something in a slow year. I hadn't thought about it once in over a decade. I sat there a long while, my back against the cold side of that tool chest, trying to understand what it meant that she'd kept this. Not just kept it, protected it, tucked it somewhere Nash would never think to look, in a workshop he'd already written off as worthless. Next morning, I drove out to Harlan's, a clapboard place 2 towns over, a rowboat rotting gentle in the side yard. He came to the door in suspenders and reading glasses, squinting at me like he was doing arithmetic with my face. Foster Sanchez, he said it slow. Been a long time. Too long. My voice came out rougher than I meant. He made coffee. Still too strong, some things never change. And I laid the deed flat on his kitchen table, smoothing the creases out with the side of my hand. He put his glasses on properly this time and bent over it, lips moving a little as he read, "Well, I'll be." He tapped the page. "You still got this thing. Lucinda kept it. Half the time I didn't even remember signing it. It's still good." Another tap, harder this time. "Never dissolved it. Never sold my half. No reason to. Land like that, nobody wanted it back then." He looked up over the rim of his glasses. "Somebody want it now?" I told him about Nash. About the redevelopment talk I'd been hearing secondhand at the hardware store. Condos. A marina expansion. The kind of project that had men in polo shirts driving slow past the harbor with tablets in their hands, sizing the place up like it already belonged to them. Harlan's eyebrows went up slow, the way a man's do when he's running numbers he doesn't like the shape of. "That's our land, Foster. Quiet, but sure. 40%'s yours. Nobody's moving one shovel of dirt on that parcel without both our names on the paper." He got up, refilled both our cups without asking, and sat back down heavier than he'd stood. "You know, your Lucinda called me about 6 months before she passed. Didn't say much, just asked if the old deed was still on file with the county, if it'd hold up. I told her sure, long as neither one of us signed it away, and she thanked me and hung up before I could even ask why she wanted to know." He shook his head slow. "Didn't think a thing of it at the time. Wish I had." I drove home with the deed sitting on the passenger seat, like it might blow off if I so much as looked at it wrong. Nash called that evening, voice gone soft again. The same voice I remembered from when he was 9 and wanted something. "Hey, Dad, been thinking. This whole thing, the house, the workshop, I know it's been a hard few weeks. Why don't you come stay with me a while? Get back on your feet." A pause, careful, rehearsed. "Actually, since I've got you, that old paperwork on the workshop land, any chance you and Mom ever signed something with anybody else? Some old partner, business deal, anything like that?" I stood in the little office with the phone against my ear, looking at the deed still lying open on the desk where I'd left it. Harlan's coffee ring, still faint, on one corner where he'd set his mug down without thinking. Some part of me wanted this to be real. Wanted to believe the boy who used to fall asleep on a stool in my shop, sawdust in his hair, was still in there somewhere, reaching out for real this time. Lucinda used to say that under all his noise, Nash just wanted somebody proud of him. Maybe that was still true. Maybe if I told him the truth about the deed right then, he'd surprise me. "Why do you keep asking about that, Nash?" I said instead. "No reason. Just tidying up estate stuff. Too fast. Too smooth. You'd tell me if there was something like that, right?" I looked down at my own younger signature on that old page and thought about how easy worthless had come out of his mouth 5 days ago, and how fast worthless had turned into somebody worth calling twice in 1 week. "I'll let you know if I find anything," I said, and hung up before he could push it further. Took me 2 more days to understand exactly what I was sitting on. I drove into town, sat across from a real estate attorney named Priya Chandra, younger than my son, sharp-eyed. The kind of person who reads a document like she's looking for the seam where it might tear. She went through the deed with the same care Harlan had, tapping figures into a calculator on her phone while I waited, a space heater humming under her desk against the October chill coming through the window behind her. This parcel, she turned her laptop screen my way. A public notice from the town planning board. Redevelopment proposal. Old Port Road, backed by an investment group, presenting to the town council in 11 days. Sanchez Pierce Harbor Residences. Underdeveloper, Nash Sanchez. He needs full title on this parcel to get financing approved. She said it plain. No drama in it, which somehow made it land harder. If 40% still legally belongs to you and Mr. Pierce, he can't close a single dollar of that deal without your signature. I sat very still in that chair, feeling something shift under me, the way the deck of a boat shifts the moment a wave you'd been watching a long way off finally reaches you. "There's something else you should know," Priya said, pulling up another window. "I ran a basic title search this morning, before you got here. Your son's application lists the parcel as fully consolidated under his name alone. That's either a mistake his lawyers made, or it's a lie he's telling investors on purpose. I can't say which. I can tell you it's the kind of thing that gets looked at hard once somebody objects. I didn't say anything to that. Just sat with it a minute, the space heater ticking, the cold outside pressing against the glass, the workshop he'd called worthless, the land he'd told me not to worry about. Wasn't a leftover at all. It was the one thing standing between my son and a deal he'd already promised to a room full of people with money. Priya slid a printed copy of the meeting notice across the desk. Public investor presentation. Town Hall, Harbor Room, 7 o'clock, 11 days from now. You've got every right to be there, she said. It's public. I folded that notice once, careful, along a crease that hadn't existed an hour before, and tucked it into my jacket pocket right next to the deed. I spent most of those 11 days out at the workshop, going through the rest of what Lucinda had left behind, in no particular hurry, because for the first time since the funeral, I had something that felt like a plan instead of just a place to sleep. I found an old photograph tucked in the bottom of the tool chest, the three of us standing in front of the shop the summer. Nash turned 9, him grinning gap-toothed in a life vest 2 sizes too big, Lucinda's hand on his shoulder. I set it up on the workbench where I'd see it every morning, not for sentiment exactly, more like a reminder of what this has all been for in the first place. Before it turned into deeds and title searches and investor meetings, the harbor room at Town Hall smelled like fresh coffee and new carpet, a smell that had no business being anywhere near the water it was named after. I stood near the back in a jacket I'd worn to Lucinda's funeral, since it was the only one still pressed, holding a folder against my chest, like it might slip away if I loosened my grip even a little. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where 3 council members sat behind name placards and bottled water. Behind them, a projector screen glowed with a rendering of glass buildings, and a marina full of boats that didn't resemble a single vessel I'd ever repaired in 41 years. 20-some people filled the chairs. Men in blazers with their phones face up on their knees, a woman taking notes on a tablet, a reporter I half recognized from the hardware store counter. Nash stood at the podium in a suit that fit him the way suits fit men who've stopped worrying what things cost. He looked good, looked confident, looked like a man who'd never once slept on a cot in a cold, dark workshop. Sanchez Pierce Harbor Residences represents a 240-unit development, he was saying, clicker in hand, voice smooth as the render behind him. Fully permitted pending final council approval, with site control secured on all 14 acres of the port parcel. Site control secured. I felt the folder against my ribs like a second pulse. He hadn't spotted me. I'd come in the side door, past a sign-in sheet I didn't bother signing, and found a seat in the back row next to an empty chair. Harlan had promised to fill 5 minutes ago and hadn't gotten to yet. For one long stretch, watching a room full of investors nod along to numbers on a screen, I nearly turned around and walked back out. Nash had a room full of people believing every word. I had a folded piece of paper 25 years old, and a knee that ached whenever weather changed, and it was changing now. Cold, coming off the water the way it does right before a storm settles in. Who in that room was going to take a retired boat mechanic's word over a man in a suit with a laser pointer? Then the side door opened. Harlan Pierce came through it in his old canvas coat, suspenders showing underneath, moving slow on account of his hip, but steady, and dropped into the chair beside me without a word. He glanced at the folder in my hands and gave one small nod, the kind of nod a man gives when the tide's coming in right on schedule and there's nothing left to say about it. Now, Nash went on, clicking to a slide covered in dollar signs with financing structured through, "Excuse me." My own voice caught me off guard, steadier than I felt. I was already up, already moving up the center aisle before I'd fully decided to. Nash's head turned. For half a second something crossed his face. Recognition, then something harder underneath it. A flash of the boy who used to hide bad report cards under his mattress. Then it smoothed right back into the podium's smile. Dad, this really isn't sight control. I kept walking till I reached the council table, close enough that the woman in the middle, her placard red chair, Marjorie Oates, looked up at me over her glasses. You said site controls secured on all 14 acres, sir, if you could take a seat, Nash said, glancing toward the investors, like he was apologizing for a dog that had wandered in off the street. I set the folder down in front of Marjorie Oates and opened it flat. My hands weren't perfectly steady, but the paper didn't need them to be. Parcel 114B, I kept my voice level. That's 4 of your 14 acres, ma'am. Partnership agreement, notarized, 1999. 40% belongs to me. 40% belongs to Harlan Pierce. Sitting right back there. Neither one of us has signed a single thing giving that up. You could feel the air change in that room before anybody spoke. Chairs creaked. A phone buzzed unanswered somewhere in a blazer pocket. This is an old document, Nash said, stepping away from the podium now, voice climbing at the edges. Outdated paperwork. My father's confused about. I'm not confused about my own signature. Nash, I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. I know what my hand looks like on a page. Harlan pushed himself up from his chair in the back, slow on account of that hip, and cleared his throat loud enough to carry the length of the room. Name's Harlan Pierce. That's my signature right there, too. And I'll tell you straight, I never sold my share of that land to anybody. Not to Nash Sanchez, not to any development outfit, not to a living soul. He looked square at the investors up front. You folks might want to check exactly what it is you're financing. One investor, gray suit, leather folio under his arm, leaned toward the woman beside him and murmured something low. She was already closing her laptop. Marjorie Oates lifted the deed with both hands, angling it toward the light, comparing something against a folder already open in front of her. This predates the title search submitted with your application, Mr. Sanchez. Flat. Procedural. Somehow worse than if she'd sounded angry at all. I'm tabling this vote pending verification, Marjorie. You can't table it tonight. We've got financing deadlines. His voice cracked at the edge, climbing half an octave he clearly hadn't meant to reach. I can. And I am. Gray suit stood, buttoning his jacket the particular way men do when half of them is already at the door. We'll step back till title's clear, he said to the room in general, and walked out with his folio tucked under his arm. 2 more investors murmured to each other, gathered coats, followed him. The reporter's pen hadn't stopped moving since I'd set that folder down. Nash stood alone at the podium, the glass towers still glowing on the screen behind him, a picture of something that might never get built now. He looked at me the way he hadn't looked at me since he was a boy. Not contempt, not impatience, something closer to fear, Dad. Quiet now, just for me, though half the room could still hear it. What did you just do? This isn't yours to sign anymore, son. I closed the folder, laid my palm flat on top of it. It's mine. I'm the one who signed it. I didn't stick around to watch the rest unravel. Harlan walked out beside me, and behind us I could hear Marjorie Oates telling what was left of the room the meeting would reconvene once ownership was sorted out properly. The fallout came fast, the way water finds every low spot in a yard after a hard rain. 2 more investors pulled out within the week. The bank holding Nash's bridge loan called it due. The local paper ran a short piece. Historic Land Dispute Stalls Harbor Project, with a black and white photo of the old parcel road that looked almost exactly the way it had 30 years back. Mrs. Doyle called me 2 days after that piece ran, and this time her voice didn't have that careful gentleness in it anymore, more like plain relief. I read the paper this morning, Foster. Didn't say a word to anybody, but I'm glad you had it in you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked her and let it sit. Nash didn't call for 11 days. When he finally showed up at the workshop, it was late afternoon, that low gold light you get over the water in October. He didn't knock. Just stood in the open doorway in jeans and a flannel shirt I hadn't seen him wear since before Lucinda got sick, looking at the hull of the old sailboat I'd been sanding down that morning. Her boat, the one she used to sit in the cockpit of, with a paperback while I worked underneath. I lost the deal. No excuse, and just laid it down flat between us. The same way I'd laid that deed down flat in front of Marjorie Oates, I know. Lost pretty much everything, actually. The investors. Most of whatever credibility I had left, he rubbed the back of his neck. A gesture so much like his mother's it caught me off guard. Don't even know why I came out here. I handed him a sanding block without answering that one. He looked at it a second, like he'd forgotten what it was for, then dropped down beside the hull and started working the grain the way I'd taught him when he was 9, slow strokes, following the wood instead of fighting it. We didn't talk much after that. Just sandpaper against fiberglass and gulls out past the breakwater. If you want any part of this, I said eventually, the workshop, whatever's left of that land, it's not going back to how it was. I kept sanding while I said it, didn't look at him, because some things are easier said to a boat hull than to a face. No more calls fishing for what's in my name, no more decisions made behind my back and dressed up as help. You show me the books. All of them. And you work here, actually work, before you get any say in what happens to this place. He didn't argue. Didn't try to talk his way around it, the way he might have a month back. Just nodded once and kept sanding. It wasn't one clean conversation that fixed things after that, if I'm honest. There were weeks where he'd show up Saturday mornings and weeks where he didn't show at all. And a couple of times he tried to steer the conversation back toward the land, toward what it might still be worth, if we handled things differently. And I just kept sanding until he dropped it. Slow going. But he kept coming back, and eventually, the coming back mattered more than any one thing he said while he was here. We launched the boat that spring on a morning cold enough to see our breath, but calm enough the harbor sat flat as a plate glass window. Harlan came, hip much better by then, along with Mrs. Doyle and a handful of neighbors who still remembered when the shop had a bell over the door. Nash helped me back the trailer down the ramp, and his hands, gripping the hull steady, had real blisters on them now, the kind that come from actual work, not the kind you get from a laptop. I'd painted her name across the stern myself, the same blue Lucinda wore to church every Sunday for 40 years. Lucinda. Nothing fancy. Just her name, sitting low in the water the same patient way she used to sit in that cockpit, waiting on the rest of us to figure things out. The boat slid off the trailer and settled into the harbor almost without a sound, one rock, then still. Nash stood next to me at the water's edge, quiet, watching her float. The way you watch something you're not entirely sure you've earned the right to see. She would have liked this, he said. She kept that deed 25 years, hoping she'd never have to use it. I watched the boat settle. I think she'd have liked this a whole lot more. I don't have some tidy lesson wrapped up in a bow to hand you at the end of this. What I've got is a boat with my wife's name on it, sitting in a harbor she used to look out at from our kitchen window, and a son who shows up now with sanding blocks instead of phone calls about deeds. That's not everything fixed. But it's real, and it's more than I had the night I slept in that cold office with a duffel bag for a pillow. If any part of this reminded you of your own family, the parts that hurt and the parts you're still working out, I'd genuinely like to hear it in the comments. That's the whole ask. This story uses recreated characters and events to reflect on family boundaries, dignity, and healing